Yes, I'm from Anguilla, David Carter. I've always lived in Anguilla after finishing university. I went to university in Jamaica, Mona. I did a degree in political science and was heavily involved in theater while I was there. Came home, I taught at the high school in Anguilla for 4 years. Went on to join the Department of Tourism, became Director of Tourism. After that, I set up my own company here, Rebel Marine Limited, custom boat builders. We build custom boats for everywhere. Um, but in the interim, I also served as parliamentary secretary in the government of Angola, responsible for education. After that, I became a special assistant to the then chief minister for constitutional affairs. I also served as Speaker of the House of Assembly in Anguilla for 5 years, backing my business. My business was continuing all of that time since 1980 to the present. Um, and I served as the chairman of the Anguilla Electric Company, ANGLEC, and I'm still in the private sector. So I've lived my life with one foot in government and one foot in the private sector, off and on all the time. So yes, so that's where we are. That's a little bit. I'm married. I have two sons and three wonderful granddaughters. So that's about it. Not a particular moment. First of all, yes, I never intended to start a boat building entity when I came home from university. I figured that based on my academic education, I would be employed in some form or another with the government of Angola, both as a teacher and as a technocrat in tourism. Um, but I lost my job for a very interesting political reason, which I don't think we need to go into for this conversation. And I found myself accidentally out in the private sector with nothing to do. I thought at that time I would have had to emigrate with the education that I had, in that there was no private sector at that time. We were talking about 1979, 1980. There was no real private sector in Angola at that time. Tourism had just begun and it was really in its construction phase. There was no open resort anywhere. Um, so I assumed that I would have to leave Angola to make a living for myself and my family. But then I got denied a visa to the US because of some antiquated US law going way back to World War II. Let me back up on that. I was offered a job in San Francisco to talk about Caribbean culture and to use, because of the a rather large audience in San Francisco of West Indian people, they wanted me to talk about that because I'm also an amateur historian, a cultural artist, etc. So that when that was denied, I realized, hey, you know what? I have to make it here in Anguilla. Now, in that regard, my father, who was a clergyman, was the son of a very famous sea captain here in Anguilla. And my father had always inspired me about stories with boats, schooners, and Anguilla's maritime history, which we'll talk about. So I decided to build a little boat to go fishing with my cousin to try and make ends meet, pay the bills. And I built a little boat, a different kind of boat. I launched it. A contractor fell in love with it. He came, he offered me a price that I couldn't refuse. I sold the boat and then the penny dropped. I figured that I was better at building boats than going fishing. So I started building boats. I called the boat Rebel because it commemorated the whole Anguilla Public Service went on strike when I was fired because they thought what had happened to me was a major injustice. So I named the boat Rebel because in appreciation for the people who had rebelliously stood up for me and for the fact that Anguilla was at that time perceived as being the rebel island in the Caribbean since it had broken away from St. Kitts and Nevis with all the drama that took place back in 1967. So I called the boat Rebel. And when I sold the boat and I realized, well, oh, let's go build boats, I set up a little company and I called the company Rebel Marine Limited. And that's where it all started. Mhm. Well, that's easy. Anguilla is 35 square miles. It's a small, small island. It has also, right up to I would say, 1981, a very, very, very poor island. We never had plantations like St. Kitts or Nevis, Antigua, Dominica, Martinique, Guadeloupe, all the Eastern Caribbean. Anguilla was always drought ridden, um, very sparsely, very arid, um, not without any large tracts of arable land, only pockets. So it was never suitable for sugar or cotton or anything, except perhaps in the 17th century for tobacco. So Anguilla always had a history of deprivation and emigration. People had to leave. People had to emigrate to all over the Caribbean, Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, the other islands to make ends meet. But in all of that poverty, they developed this exceptional um, ability to build boats. And even for a tiny population in a very uh, poor island, for some remarkable fluke of history, which I think I can trace back to a link with salt mining and the trade in Nova Scotia, Anguilla was able to develop some really great boats, schooners and sloops that sailed all over the Caribbean, primarily to carry Anguillians to other islands to make ends meet and also to do whatever little trading they could do between the other islands, the more wealthy islands, again, to create income. And it is that maritime heritage is absolutely crucial to our understanding of our own history and who we are. And it has always inspired me because of the underlying poverty from out of which it arose and the remarkable skills that Anguillians were able to master to make it happen. And the fact that without the schooner building, the sloop building, and the boat racing, and I'll tell you more about that later, our culture would have been absolutely different. So whatever we prize in our culture in Anguilla today owes a lot to the environmental conditions of drought and to the historical conditions of schooner and sloop building in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Yes. Well, we are doing that very actively at the present, and it's not a sterile museum type preservation. It is alive in its culture, much like Bequia, and I understand Guadeloupe has perhaps a similar thing. But let me give you the background to that. Because Anguilla was so poor and drought ridden, and because for the first 6 months of every year, hundreds of Anguillian men had to emigrate to the cane fields of the Dominican Republic via the schooners and sloops that took Anguillians there and brought them home. A culture of boat racing started to infect the people for two reasons. One, the schooners and sloops that came home from Santo Domingo, from the towns of La Romana and Macorís, raced a lot. And the competition, not just between the sailors, but you have to remember now that there were a lot of men on board these schooners going to and fro. They were not sailors, they were not mariners, they were laborers going into the cane fields of the Dominican Republic. But they got infected by the race. So that started it. And whenever the schooners came home to Anguilla in late July or early August, there was always a lot of community, family-oriented women and children coming down to the beaches to welcome their loved ones home. Then in the latter 6 months of the year, when at last we got a little bit of rain, because our rainy season is typically in November, they would plant their little grounds, their little small holdings, primarily corn, peas, guinea corn, sweet potatoes, that sort of thing. And to do that in a very poor place, you had to rely on your neighbors to help you, and then you had to go help your neighbors. And it developed a tradition called jollification, where you help each other. And you couldn't pay your friends to come and help you, hoe the ground and plant the crops. But what you had to do was you had to provide them with food and drink, and you had to provide them with alcohol. Now, because you had to give them some rum, sweet gin, or brandy. Now, you could get that in St. Martin, because as you know, if you look at the map, you will see how close French St. Martin is to Anguilla. And the French culture at that time, of course, fine liquors and alcohol and so on is part of the French culture. And they were selling it at a much, much cheaper rate than in Anguilla, because Anguilla, which was then part of the British Empire, had this horrific tax on alcohol. I mean, ridiculous. Nobody, even somebody who was fairly well off, couldn't afford that sort of tax. So what happened was a cool history of smuggling erupted between Anguilla and St. Martin, primarily smugglers from Anguilla, in fact, almost totally from Anguilla, where Anguillian sailors and shipwrights would now start building smaller boats, not the big schooners, 60 feet, 70 feet, but small open boats. And open boats were very crucial. So you can imagine just an open hull with ballast made of rocks and sand, and a rig, a single mast with a Bermuda rig, simple triangular Bermuda rig, mainsail, jib. And they would go fishing during the day. And as soon as the sun set and it was dark, they would head across to St. Martin to load with alcohol, gin, rum, back to Anguilla before dawn, so they could avoid the customs and what we used to call in those days revenue officers. But what emerged out of that is that the boats had to be fast. So, shipwrights had to be careful to make the boats fast. And then on top of that, the rig where you stood up the mast and the sails had to be able to come down very quickly. So instead of pulling down your sail, as we do in most boats all over the world, and as we did in the schooners, you wanted to drop the whole rig quickly, because you didn't want a mast sticking up that easily the revenue officers could easily see. So that sort of anchored itself and in the culture. And fishermen fishermen who were smugglers last night but were now fishermen this morning got into the competition, right? So if we go to the fishing grounds, let's have a race. So between the schooners coming back from Santo Domingo and all this smuggling and fishing, the small boats that were easily hauled up, easily pulled down, much, much easier to handle than big schooners or sloops. This culture of boat racing stuck in, right? And then in 1940, in Sandy Ground, which you know, there was a formal, organized, hey, let's have a formal race. Now, August Monday, as you know, in the British Empire is the former British Empire commemoration of the emancipation of slaves. So all over the Eastern Caribbean, still today, the 1st of August is Emancipation Day, is commemorated still. In Anguilla, we never commemorated the 1st of August. We commemorated the first Monday in August. And prior to 1940, the big festivities were on the park in the middle of. Yes, right, yes. So we celebrate Emancipation Day on the first Monday in August, not the 1st of August, like a lot of our neighbors. I think Antigua and most islands. I think Antigua does the 1st of August. We celebrated the first Monday in August. So we have this tradition called August Monday. And prior to 1940, the celebrations were all based on religion, on the institution of the Anglican Church holding a fete on the park where they would have races, tug of war. You sell, your little sugar cakes and all that. Anguilla is still very, very poor at that time. And you have fun running races, that sort of thing. But so the fishermen now and the smugglers decided, to heck with that, let's have a boat race. So they started that in August, Monday, 1940, in the village of Sandy Ground. And the smuggling fishing boats came from Blowing Point to Sandy Ground, from West End to Sandy Ground, some from Island Harbor to Sandy Ground, and they had a great time. And it stuck. And August Monday from 1940 right through till 1981, I think it was a big event in Sandy Ground focused entirely on boat racing. And it grew so much that was Monday. Then we had August Thursday in West End, where all the boats would go to the biggest beach in West End, which is a Western village. And the same thing would happen. You would have, a full boat race, which attracted everybody from all over the island. And then that grew again so that we now have August Wednesday, where you raced to Blowing Point, and then August Tuesday that you race to Island Harbor. So the sport is deeply rooted in Anguillan culture, still alive, modernized to a significant degree. We now use more sophisticated sails, and we use a little more modern equipment in building the boats, but all the basic elements are still there. An open hull, open ballast, a rig that falls down completely, all the traditions that started through a history of deprivation and smuggling are still there. So that's. No, I wouldn't say there's anything that is uniquely Anguillan in the modern boat building tradition. What Rebel Marine, what my company does, is simply build on that tradition by inspiring its employees, all of whom are Anguillan, to appreciate their culture and understand that as professional and as unique as a former generation of Anguillians were to develop cool boats 100, 150 years ago, we must do the same. But we have to tailor what we produce to what the modern society and the modern world needs. So, not constrained, but you have to follow if you're in the early 20th century, there was no such thing as an outboard engine or engines. I mean, everything was sail. Well, nobody's wasting time nowadays sailing between Anguilla and St. Martin, or between Guadeloupe and Dominica or Antigua. Um, it's all powered. It's all modern materials that are far more durable and long lasting than what we had to use 100 years ago. So that's where we are. So we are custom boat builders. So when a client comes, a client tells us what they want, not what we want. We don't say, well, this is the Anguillian boat that you need to buy. They tell us. So whether it's a fishing boat, a party boat, a ferry that runs quickly between the islands, of which we do a lot of work in that bracket. Um, I have to sit down, as I am not only the owner of the company, but I'm the lead designer. I sit down with the client and I've asked him what he wants. And when I have some clarity as to what he wants, I design the boat. So our designs are all local. We do our own designs. We don't import designs from anywhere else, US or otherwise. But we build to a client's needs, and we import, just like we had to do 100 years ago. We import the basic materials, which are all modern, modern epoxies, modern knitted fabrics of fiberglass, inorganic materials that won't rot like of course our forebears had to deal with, all wood and all metal nails. Now so we brought the industry into the 21st century, infusion all the modern techniques. You have to, if you want to be a viable industry in today's world. That's what we do. So I can't say that there's anything particularly Anguillian about what we do at Rebel Marine. We are a commercial operation. What happens in boat racing is quite Anguillian, because even though they do use modern materials in constructing the boats, the principles of the boat are throwback and a hold to what occurred in the past. I hope that answers the question. I'm not sure if I did. Yes. In the early days, our clients were all local, and the primary local need was for small, easy to handle fishing boats around anywhere between 26 and 34 feet. Outboard powered. The culture, fishermen in Anguilla do not like to overnight on any fishing bank. They want to go and get back. They want to go and get back same day. So that was a good market, and that we developed a lot of boats. And then there were a few expatriates, people who from overseas who had built homes on Anguilla. They wanted pleasure boats, which we call limers. I'm sure you know the West Indian. I think it was coined in Trinidad, where if you have a party, it's called a lime. So we call our party boats limers. So we built a few limers. And then when tourism began to click, our airport facilities were very inadequate. So most of our guests flew into St. Martin, and they had to travel by slow ferry from Marigot to Blowing Point. So a few entrepreneurs came up with the cool idea of building small, faster boats to go straight into Juliana. And that turned into a boom. We had to build a lot of boats for that traffic. But over the years, and now we're doing quite a few boats for the British Virgin Islands in that same venue, getting passengers from Beef Island to Virgin Gorda, or from Tortola to the Keys, that sort of thing. So what we've done, between limers and fast ferries, we've built for St. Martin, we've built for St. Bart's, we've built for Antigua. We've done a lot of work, still doing a lot of work for Nevis and St. Kitts fast ferry. We're launching a big 48-footer, big for us, next week, hopefully, for Nevis. We've done for the BVI. We've shipped boats to North Carolina, Florida, and parts for boats to Florida, Alabama, and again to North Carolina. That is where big custom yards in the US subcontract us to build parts to install into their yachts. So we build, put them in a container, ship them to Florida, and it saves them time, and it's good business for us. So we have to be versatile. If you live in a tiny society with 15,000 people, you don't have a huge market. The Caribbean is not a huge market in terms of boats. There's a lot of competition out there, and you have to be versatile and not build like a production model where you build the same boat, like cookie cutters. No, you can't do that. You have to build whatever the client wants, and you have to be versatile in what you do. And that's how we fit in. Well, I don't know if Anguilla is best suited for that in some areas, and it's very suitable for that in others. Unlike the Grenadines and the BVI, they have a multiplicity of keys all around that offer safe harbors. Anguilla does not have safe harbors. People don't realize that. Anguilla has always suffered, which makes our maritime history even more remarkable as to how they were able to survive this. Anguilla has no sheltered ports, none. We don't have a marina. We keep talking about building marinas, but we haven't gotten around to it yet. So in terms of yachting, where people use sailboats, Anguilla is not the best place for that. And that's easily demonstrated if you compare Anguilla to St. Martin, where St. Martin has a huge Simpson Bay Lagoon and all the amenities necessary to maintain, develop, and manage the moorings or big yachting companies. On the other hand, Anguilla has spectacular beaches and a very pristine and clear marine environment all around the island, and in a few keys, the Prickly Pear Keys and Dog Island, which people love to visit. So a lot of our visitors who come to Anguilla, and our tourism is quite sophisticated now, and has made Anguilla relatively a prosperous place. A lot of those visitors take day trips to the Keys, day trips to other beaches from wherever their resort is, and it's a good business. It has employed quite a few people. I'm lucky to say that a lot of the boats that do that are built by Rebel Marine. So there are two sides to this. Without marinas, I don't think the industry will grow. With marinas, it might grow more in terms of management, maintenance. In the Southern Caribbean, the maintenance and storage of yachts is huge. In Anguilla, that doesn't happen. And of course, hurricane season, those few, and they're very few. In fact, I think there's only like one charter company that does day trips in a traditional way with sail. They have to run to the Southern Caribbean at the start of the hurricane season and sit it out down there until November and then come back home. And these are Anguillian boats, Anguillian owners, etc. But even to haul them out and store them during the hurricane season is very difficult. So right now, that side of the business isn't really growing. The marine experience of visitors, swimming, diving, snorkeling in pristine waters and a beautiful ocean is very much alive. And there's a little bit of a dispute and a little bit of tension as to in the Anguillian community as to whether that should remain or whether that should be expanded. And for environmental reasons, there's some of us, myself included, who feel it should be restrained because overdevelopment of tourism, over tourism can destroy just as much as tourism has built. So there's always that balance. So that's where it is at present. But of course, as the generations change and attitudes change and the cultures change, that too might change. So that's where at present, The challenges are in a lot of competition, not so much from the Caribbean, because I have chosen a very risky path in going head to head with boat building in developed countries where all the main resources, both financial and technical, reside. But I have not given up, and I will never give up on the fact that we have the skills. We may not have the financial resources, but we have the skills. And if our governments can look at boat building the way they look at tourism, where they invest in helping to be competitive and find the niches within the developed world where there are gaps in the boat building world, I think the business can grow because you have to remember, in the case of Anguilla, it's 15,000 people. Now, if you employed 1% of that working population, that's a big, hit to your GDP. That's very good for your GDP if you look at it that way. Right now, it's much smaller than that because there's only one private sector entity that is pushing this. Now, if you look at it from perspective of St. Martin has already proven my point. St. Martin doesn't invest in boat building so much as St. Martin invests in boat maintenance and management. That employs a lot of people in St. Martin, and St. Martin has done really well from that aspect of the marine industry, which is good, great. I want to push the actual skills of boat building. Um, but they're all, they're two sides of the same coin. It's all maritime development. Um, so I still see opportunity. I still see a hope that we can move this to a higher level. As you can see, my hair is now gray. Somebody with black hair might be able to move the needle higher. But I'm optimistic that we can get it better. I don't know if I am qualified to speak to that in that I have not had any formal contacts with anybody in this profession at any serious level in other islands. Now, I don't say that with any pride. I think that's perhaps a failure because I think there's much. Every island, by the very definition of it being an island, has to rely on maritime trades, whether it's boat building or boat maintenance, boat repair, whatever. There has to be. And every single island in the Caribbean, every single one, depends on the marine trades. So if you ask if there's room for development, absolutely. Um, should there be should there be something that perhaps the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and we just had the news this week that French Saint Martin is now joining us, which is very, 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 very good. Maybe if people like me and others brought this to the attention of our political leaders, maybe some new emphasis can be put in this regard. But there's certainly a good opportunity for overlap. There are multiple skills in building a boat. There are multiple skills in maintaining and managing a boat. And sometimes you don't have all the skills in one place. So, you can share skills. Someone can fly in from St. Lucia to do this, or fly down from St. Martin, from Anguilla to do that. I mean, I give you a classic example. Anguilla's skills in schooner building and sloop building back in the 1950s and 40s was so well recognized that shipwrights from Anguilla went to Montserrat to build schooners for people in Montserrat. Well, that's a clear example of skill sharing. Now you have far more sophisticated skills that are necessary. All the engineering skills, outboard maintenance, all the high-tech stuff that's coming down, even, in electronics and mechanical engineering that boats now use as a matter of course. Those are skills that are completely different from the guy who is building a boat with frames and fiberglass, but it's all part of the boat. you know. So skill sharing is very much a possibility. But the other thing too, and this is harder but real, is that the vast majority of boats used in the Caribbean is all imported. Rebel Marine and maybe a few others, perhaps in Carriacou, I think in Trinidad, are isolated satellites building boats. But I can say very confidently that in our genre of boats, we can compete head to head in terms of quality than any boat ordered from the United States or Europe. We just built a boat for St. Bart's for a very nice gentleman, businessman who wanted his boat insured in St. Bart's and therefore in France. And for him to be able to pass that bar, he had to get a naval architect from Paris to come to Anguilla on 3 occasions to inspect our work for him to be able to get the insurance that he needed, certification. Fair enough. He didn't make the rules. I didn't make the rules. He had to, make the arrangements, and he was willing to do that. And on the 3 occasions, on every occasion, the naval architect was absolutely happy with the quality of work we did, right through from start to actual launch and delivery to the owner. So I am confident that if Little Anguilla can keep doing that, so can other islands. And the opportunity to build boats, I think, is there in every one of the Eastern Caribbean cultures. So how do we get there? I don't have the answer just yet. well, like I said, I would turn the clock back and wind the clock forward. Uh, I have always been amazed at what our forebears did. And I tell you, I'll back that up with evidence. There is a very unique book, you might have seen it, called Clean Sweet Wind, Sailing Craft of the Lesser Antilles. It was written by an American naval architect, not a Caribbean person, not me. And he did a really good job by going to every island, the BVI, Anguilla, St. Martin, Saba, St. Kitts, Antigua, all the way down to Carriacou, recording what they were doing, talking to them. And he compared an Anguillian schooner named the Warspite, thank God, built by my grandfather. I'm proud to say, very proud to say. And he compared that boat in terms of speed and efficiency to the Blue Nose schooner that is world famous. It was built in Nova Scotia, Canada. Um, the Blue Nose, if you know anything about schooner history, the Blue Nose is an icon. It was absolutely famous schooner. So cool, so famous that it was wrecked and lost, I think, in the 1960s off Haiti. And the government of Nova Scotia rebuilt it, rebuilt a replica, which you can still see if you visit Halifax, Nova Scotia. This naval architect, Douglas Pyle, compared an Anguillian schooner in its ability, in its speed, and its inefficiency to the Blue Nose. Now, if that doesn't give you a little glimpse of the level of excellence that was achieved, and it's not just Anguilla. His book is on all the islands. He had a lot of great things to say about the Grenadines and the schooner builders down there. I mean, classic stuff. So my dream is building on that. If we could fast forward to this century and beyond, I still feel that West Indian builders, West Indian boat builders, can hold on to that level of excellence and continue this tradition going forward. I don't know if I'll see it, but I'm happy. If I'm David, I'm happy for the Solomons and those who come after to build the temples. All right. Easy. That we are all part of the sea. We are creatures of the sea. If you can link it in so many ways. I mean, the awfulness of the Middle Passage, the fact that so many of our phobias, the vast majority of our phobias, had to enjoy a horrific sea voyage to get to islands. You can start there, and then you can carry that forward to the simple pleasures of a family going to the beach to have fun with their children in the sea, to our utter reliance for so many of our years on the bounty of the sea, the fish, and how the fish that we catch, the types of fish that we catch, the types of cuisine that have been developed over the fish that we catch, right? You look at the Kalinago or Dominica and their brilliance in moving from island to island with their development of canoes and craft that came from island to island. If you look at pre-Columbian history in Anguilla, I mean, in the Caribbean, the Eastern Caribbean, their linkage between all the islands, all relying on boats moving from island to island to island. Or we can have a full conversation on that alone. And then today, every one of us, whether we like it or not, whether we sometimes get annoyed or not, we are absolutely reliant, almost absolutely reliant on the tourist industry. Why do tourists come to the Caribbean? Is it because we are pretty? Because we are nice? No, no. It is primarily because of the beauty of our marine environment, and by extension, of course, in some islands, to the beauty of our islands itself, the tropical flora and all the rest of that. But I will argue, certainly as an Anguillian, because if you know Anguilla, you know we don't have the beauty of flora and fauna like Dominica or St. Lucia. No how, no way. We are a semi-arid brush island, right? Our spectacular claim to any of nature's bounty is because of the sea. So there it is. I can link all sorts of links, make the case that the sea is part of us and we are part of the sea. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. I hope that was good. All right. Okay.